could this be the end of Fall Guys, or will we be perfectly fine in 2 months? That's the question a lot of the community has been asking, and me included. This week has probably been the most concerning week to be a Fall Guys player out of this game's whole 5-year lifespan. Whether you know all the details of what's been going on and have been seeing the dumpster fire going on in the community at the moment, or you have no idea what I'm talking about and had no idea the future of this game was in jeopardy, this video should provide some great insight for you. I'm not going to be fearmongering for no reason, but also I'm not going to be sugarcoating anything concerning. I'm going to explain the situation, all the things that led up to it over the past several years, the potential direction the game could go in over the coming months and years, and also offer some explanation of what Mediatonic can do to make things better and keep the game thriving even if things truly are bad. Let's start off with a quick recap of the day before the update so we can talk about how we got into this situation first of all. That seems important before we dive into new stuff and my thoughts. Monday the 15th of September 2025, everything was fine and peaceful. We were all looking forward to waking up tomorrow to a brand new update. Some people had high expectations, some were lower, but either way, every update over the past 9 or 10 months has offered new content. Always new features in creative, always fairly fleshed out themes to check out, and new levels to enjoy then try to master. So these things continuing with practically everyone's expectations. We even already knew the update had a theme because they left some files in it that indicated it would be a slime factory update. Fast forward 24 hours, the update drops, we load up the game and we don't see new levels. That's a bit weird. We load up creative, can't find a single new thing in there. Mediatonic posts the patch notes, they act like everything's fine. Wow, new update, Fame Pass, bug fixes and more. Credit where it's due, the unvaulted variations and some old levels from the past year or so being updated was neat, I guess, but no acknowledgement of there being nothing new, no explanation, no anything. This is frustrating, of course, waiting 2 months for an update and then it contains no new content without any communication as to why that is, but it's okay. Mediatonic has had bad updates like this before when they're busy working on something. Legacy Season 6 dragged on because they were working on free-for-all, SS3 dragged on because they were working on creative, and I guess more recent things would be mobile and ranked if you can count those as anything, so it wouldn't really be worth worrying too hard about, except for the fact that there's more to this than just a bad update. As you might be aware if you saw my last video or looked into this situation prior to clicking on this Fall Guys update did some future-proofing to say the least. It's normal for updates to future-proof by a couple months, like this update's file was having cosmetics for the next Fame Pass and even for winter and Christmas is fairly normal. Mediatonic just liked working ahead on that kind of thing. They also have the entire show schedule for this update in the game's files going up to the 11th of November 2025, which is fine but just a bit unusual since they usually only add that week by week. There's also a new monthly event schedule, so September has Ranked Squad Spectacular and a Kudos event, October has a Halloween event featuring the return of Treat Thieves, and for some unknown reason they decided November just had to be Ranked 4-Ball Cup Trios, which features the same Kudos event as September. So more future-proofing than usual already, but what they also did is not just having winter-themed cosmetics in the files, but they go up to Easter, almost 7 months away, and even the game's 6th anniversary banner, when the 5th anniversary was literally just last month. Alright, so obviously after seeing how future-proofed everything is, conveniently coinciding with an update with no actual content, everyone naturally assumed this game is going to a bad place at least. Some people just assuming it's shutting down because of this, some people assuming it's just going on autopilot for the next several years, and some people assuming this is just going to be another content drought that will suck immensely but will get out of and get back to normal. So Mediatonic had to respond on Twitter, and their response was, how do I say this? Well, it was terrible and made everything worse and everyone hates them now. All the response says is that the future of Fall Guys will contain new ranked cycles, unvaults, live events and limited time shows, as well as new Fame Passes, which we just discussed is what this update has as its only features, and that's where the whole problem lies. Mediatonic communication has sucked in the past, sometimes they really do just forget to mention when an update has new levels or new features or anything like that. Heck, they always shadow drop updates too, meaning they're not announced in advance and you just have to know when they'll be from the Fame Pass timer if it doesn't get extended a day before, and then you get patch notes a few hours after launch. So yeah, communication sucks and this could be a giant misunderstanding, but Mediatonic only added fuel to a fire here because this quite literally implies what everyone was initially fearing. The only content mentioned is things that get ran on autopilot with no new content. So by now, no matter how bad you think the situation is, or if you think it'll be okay and people are overreacting, hopefully you'll at least understand the situation very well. So I think it's worth looking into how we ended up in this spot. Let's zoom out a bit. What previous bad decisions have led us here? Because obviously it's not just one thing that led to the situation of, well, either huge content drought or total long-term autopilot. That's still up to interpretation. Let's rewind all the way back to Fall Guys launch, which I promise is relevant. I'll try my best best to get through all of the issues that led us to this point in just a few minutes. Mediatonic was a very tiny team, and Fall Guys was just an indie game, but it blew up more than they could have ever expected. It had millions of players within literal days, and as far as I can tell, still holds the world record of most downloaded PS Plus game of all time, despite only being on PlayStation as a PS Plus exclusive and on Steam as a paid game. It got huge in a way Mediatonic wasn't prepared for, and that was immediately apparent. This small indie studio quickly had to scale up, try their best to get new content out and fix bugs. Heck, the game literally had no anti-cheat for its first month, or if it did, it was so easily bypassable it might as well have not existed. It's not worth going into every detail of this, but just understand the general idea that Mediatonic was a tiny company with a game way bigger than they could handle, and they'd kind of created a mess for themselves. But they managed. The game still had a very good player base and was still getting frequent updates, and about 7 months after launch, Mediatonic was acquired by Epic Games. This was fine for a while, the game stayed pretty much the same, but we did soon see our first content droughts. Seasons were 2 or 3 months, but after Epic came in, Legacy Season 4 was 4 months, Season 5 was close to 5 months, and Season 6, well, it was just under 7 months long. To me, this is a sign of the game having fairly poor management. They were obviously working on free-for-all in the background, which is what made the game free to play, and that's likely what Epic's whole plan was to increase its popularity. These late Legacy times weren't bad by any means. I still played nearly every day, but they definitely lacked content because Mediatonic just wasn't prepared to have free-for-all take so long, and they had not a whole lot of stuff to give us in the meantime. But fast forward to June 2022, and free-for-all has launched. Such a good season that everyone seems to love. Switch and Xbox ports are out, the game is free, it gets over 50 million players within a few days. You get the idea. Then we fast forward just 2 months later to August 2022, where Mediatonic released a quick hotfix just to fix some bugs or whatever, and Switch players are experiencing flashing lights that could easily cause seizures to anyone with conditions related to that. Right, okay. This is where we see them temporarily vault every level with speed arches and low gravity zones while we fix the issue, because those are what caused it, and also where we see a sign of QA testing obviously lacking and struggling. Then, less than a month later, SS2 launches, probably the biggest season ever, having 8 levels and probably almost 100 variations, arguably the best theme, and everything was so fleshed out, it was awesome, pretty sure everyone loved it. But this was the start of them vaulting maps arbitrarily. Before, levels only got removed if they were actually broken, then they got fixed and brought back, but this is where they started vaulting for quote-unquote no reason. This is where cracks really begin to show that this game is having problems. Not even 3 weeks into the season, Space Race, its most iconic level, had to be removed because it was too buggy. Same happened with so many other levels, and then by the time we had a He-Man event, which also removed some levels from squads arbitrarily, it literally had less levels than the game launched with in 2020. That's the kind of situation we ended up in. It got so bad we were insanely worried about the game's issues, not just vaulting, but also the state of other things like skill-based matchmaking and lack of communication. We started a hashtag Save Fall Guys movement that got picked up by various media outlets and forced Mediatonic to at least explain vaulting. Basically what it seems like is the game got way too big for them, their ambitions, or possibly Epic's, got way too huge, and they ended up in a situation where they were just working on too much, and this is a sign of it all coming crashing down because they didn't have the time to actually QA test everything, make sure it's all stable, etc. Limiting the round pool of the game allowed them to focus on less levels at once because they literally couldn't handle them all. I think this is the first culmination of a bunch of things going wrong, from presumably bad management to presumably Epic pushing them and crunching them as hard as possible with how much content SS1 and SS2 had in such a small amount of time, and then expecting them to release creative soon after. It was too much, and vaulting was just a necessary solution to lower their workload. It sucked, we all hated vaulting, and thankfully it's mostly a thing of the past now, only a handful of things are still in the vault, but it was necessary. Then the aftermath was SS3 having a giant content drought of 0 things added between December 2022 and April 2023 until creative launched and SS4 arrived in mid-May. I promise I'm getting there to tying this into the topic this video is actually about. Right, a few months after creative, and it seems like Mediatonic kinda admits they can't continue this cycle anymore, having a bunch of big seasons with big updates in them in a reasonable time frame, then falling behind as they work on the next big thing and having content droughts. So they just removed seasons entirely. In my opinion, this was a good change. I'm glad they realised and kind of admitted the problem with seasons and just moved away. We still got very frequent updates, around 5 or 6 weeks between them if I'm not mistaken, and they still had neat new additions to keep things fresh. We got this roadmap for just 4 months of content, and you can see there's quite a few things listed to keep us interested and looking forward to. But then a month later, Mediatonic experienced decimation as Epic Games laid off hundreds of employees. It's unclear how much of Mediatonic was affected, but the estimates floating around were that about half of Mediatonic was gone overnight. Obviously, laying off half of people working on a game that was already struggling with being overloaded with work was not good and did not leave much room for updates to be frequent, significant, and polished. It also doesn't help that development of the Fall Guys mode inside of Fortnite's UEFN time was also going on around this time, taking a bunch of staff from Mediatonic to help with that instead of the actual Fall Guys game. So we saw stuff like the Shapes and Stickers update adding, well, not much more than shapes and stickers to be honest. We saw the Survival update being really cool, but literally having a 10-week gap before its next update. Fall Forever followed, having us see a major shift in the game's direction. It had a bunch of cool features and changes that aren't relevant for this video, but what is worth talking about is that the game's new mode became Knockout, which at the time was a mixture of 30 to 40 levels and was meant to rotate every month or so. It was largely carried by community levels, which some players called lazy, but to me I love seeing levels by the community featured prominently, and I'm sure it means a ton for the creators being featured. So I think this was a great balance. Knockout has consistent refreshes, Mediatonic can use community levels to relieve pressure while they're busy working on new creative updates so that those same creators can make even better levels, and when Mediatonic has time they'll also make new levels. This seemed to work well. We had 2 minor updates that still felt fresh, and then we got the Scrapyard Stumble update, which many considered to be the best post-seasonal update. Even after the layoffs, this update had a ton of new content and was the beginning of themed updates returning, which a lot of people consider to be just like mini-seasons. But we eventually arrived at the November 2024 update, which began the last turning point before this week's update. It was the last update with pretty much nothing in it. It made the most confusing decision to me, removing community levels from Knockout, which I just discussed why that was so good. It's more content and takes pressure off Mediatonic so they can focus on updates and only make levels when they actually have time. I will make a whole video at some point about how Fall Guys has treated level creators and how that whole thing has went since creative launch, because this is a very long topic, so I won't spend any more time on it here. But after the shift, we saw updates go from being around 5 weeks with a huge amount of community levels to play to being around 8 weeks with just a few Mediatonic ones. We started consistently getting new themes and decorations and stuff every single update, which was awesome despite how 8 weeks caused mini content droughts towards the end. I was happy for this to be the future of the game, but then we arrived here where we are today. To me, it's a sudden and unexpected shift to go from these awesome updates with new themes every 8 weeks to suddenly arriving here with an update like this one. But looking at everything I just said, there's many recurring patterns of incompetence and issues that have led us to here. From the game's launch being too much to handle and forcing Mediatonic to rapidly scale, to large content droughts in the later legacy seasons, to the absolute crunch the team must have been on during the early free-for-all, to the layoffs and moving a bunch of remaining staff to Fortnite, to removing community levels, to this. There's been plenty of stuff that's happened in this game throughout its history, and this situation isn't so surprising if you look back. I also didn't go into much detail about the fact the game's PS4 port was borderline unplayable for months this year, and I heard it's still not great, and the Switch port has for the longest time been, well, it's been something to say the least. There's so many of these signs, some small and some big, that make this a whole lot less surprising that we got led here. Whew, next topic. So before talking about how Mediatonic could repair the damage this update did and take this game back to how its content cycle should be, I want to first touch on all the possibilities of why they made this decision, of course referencing the incompetence we just went over. This will be more in depth than my first video, so if you already watched that, you'll hear new points here. So the first reason this update is the way it is could just be that they needed more time for the next update. There's nothing more to it, and the other stuff like the future-proofing of 1,000 and monthly content cycle is just a huge coincidence they were going to do anyway. This is plausible, but it's understandable if you think otherwise, especially since the Fall Guys Twitter response really didn't help. The second possibility is that the game is going on autopilot indefinitely. It'll keep having this monthly content cycle, all the dedicated players will leave, but casual players who might care less about specific updates will keep coming in and out as they always do, so the game will slowly be left to rot over the next several years but not shut down unless it actually doesn't have enough players to be sustained. To me, I don't see this because Fall Guys is still such a massive game and was just getting major updates. I cannot wrap my head around why Epic would want to let it die a slow and painful death. What's even less likely in my eyes is possibility number 3, that a shutdown is just planned for sometime next year with nothing to replace it, and that'll just get announced in a few months, and this is truly it. That's a waste because this game is surely still bringing in money, and again, it's still huge. Shutting down such a huge game would be such a waste. And number 4, which there's not much evidence for, but I think it's still very plausible, is the Fortnite port actually happening. I think it's important to touch on why this theory actually exists. Most people know that Fortnite wants to be a metaverse TM competing with Roblox, and this is already shown by them having a bunch of game modes, from a music mode to a racing mode to a first-person shooter, to such creative and diverse creator-made wonders as Steal the Brainrot, Unbox the Brainrot, Steal That Brainrot Duos, Brainrot Evolution, Trader Brainrot, and Brainrot Box Fights. Now, who wouldn't want Fall Guys to become part of such a glorious platform? Okay, but I should explain why it's it's plausible. Mainly, we need to talk about Rocket League, another game Epic bought the developer of a few years before Mediatonic. They already released Rocket Racing, a spin-off inside of Fortnite in 2023. It's kind of a larger scale version of what Epic did with the Fall Guys UAFN integration in 2024, which is quite limited and just lets people make Fall Guys stuff in Fortnite, whereas Rocket Racing is its own fully playable game. And Fortnite leakers seem to be indicating that a proper and complete version of Rocket League will be ported into Fortnite beyond just Rocket Racing. And because of these rumours, people are expecting Fall Guys to take a similar path. I don't know how likely the Rocket League and Fortnite thing is to come true or how many months or years away it'd be, but if it does happen, or if more leaks come out about it, then it does become more likely Fall Guys could see the same thing later on. The thing is though, I don't think Rocket League has quite seen the same kind of autopilot future-proofing with a meaningless update that Fall Guys just did. I think the game naturally gets less big updates than Fall Guys because it's a more competitive game that people would hate if it changed all the time, but they at least still regularly get new maps to play on and stuff like that, so it's not a concrete rumour by any means, but it's definitely something to keep in mind and keep an eye on, especially if more signs show of a full-on Rocket League port coming to Fortnite, since that would probably happen before Fall Guys followed. The thing is, while there's not a whole lot of evidence for this happening with Fall Guys yet, and it's mostly just a theory, I just don't see the other outcomes being as plausible. Shutting the game down makes no sense unless it's a way of forcing people over to the Fortnite version once it's ready. Having the game on autopilot indefinitely makes no sense when we just had big updates and the game is still so big. Continuing big updates every 2 months and having this be a one-off would have been the most likely, but of course we know the amount of future-proofing and the horrible statement on the Fall Guys Twitter account kind of count against that. There's no definitive answer, you have to come to the conclusion yourself of what you expect from the future of Fall Guys, and time will tell if you're right. Whether it's another statement or the November update or new leaks related to Fortnite, something will happen soon to help us figure it out, and I absolutely recommend having notifications on for my channel because obviously I'll make sure you know if any of those things happen, and in general I'm going to keep posting more content on everything Fall Guys related. So as for how Mediatonic can solve this whole situation if they really want the game to continue living on, well, I think the biggest problem is the lack of new levels. Obviously getting new themes and stuff is nice, but having stuff to physically play is number one in my eyes. So even if there wasn't time to add new creative features, they could make more levels with the existing tools, revisit old themes, because usually they just do a theme once and then don't touch it again because they're too busy with the next one. Classic theme levels are a bit overdone, but how about SS4's digital theme, which they've barely touched in years? How about the Slime Cave theme from the start of this year, maybe using the new features like the movement controller? I think if you're not adding a new theme, it creates an especially good opportunity to utilise the existing ones more. Heck, they could even make their own theme. The Winter 2024 update didn't technically add a theme to creative, they just used the existing winter theme and then made up their own Wild West themed levels just using custom colour palette and stuff like that. I'd love to see that again. There's pretty much infinite possibilities, and actually not having the decorations handed to you forces you to think outside of the box a bit with how you build your own decorations to fit your custom theme. I've said this to level creators before, but I think it's something Mediatonic themselves needs to hear too. Just because there's no new features, or at least not the features you want, like if you didn't like the Blunder Beach theme last update, doesn't stop you from making what you want to make outside of those features. But alright, let's assume Mediatonic actually couldn't make new levels for us. I don't believe it, but that's fine. At least give us the 2 or 3 levels you literally put in the Fame Pass trailer. This has been recurring for a while. They make custom levels for the Fame Pass trailer that we can't play, but this has never coincided with them not actually giving us any levels in an update. This is what annoyed me the most. If you really don't have the time to make more than this, either give us these levels, or instead of wasting your time on a Fame Pass trailer level, make ones built for gameplay and then just show off the Fame Pass cosmetics using those in the trailer. They don't have to be unique. Fine, let's assume Mediatonic genuinely can't make new levels. They proved they can with a Fame Pass trailer, but if we just pretend that didn't happen and pretend they really can't make new levels, then there's a great solution. As I discussed when talking about how Knockout used to be, they have probably thousands of people making levels in creative. Again, I'll make a dedicated video on this topic, but in short, pick some levels people made. Pick a specific theme of level to look for, or just look for any levels at all. There's plenty that I'm sure are built to be played in a normal game of Fall Guys, or at least in an LTM. Or if you actually can't find what you want, you have social media accounts with millions of followers, you have a newsfeed that can reach every player, so just ask people to make the levels you need. Just make a tweet like, we just released our Slime Factory update but need help with making levels for it. Please make a level in this theme with these things in mind and submit the level code in replies. You have this deadline and we'll put our favourites in game on this date. Like, see, is it so hard? Maybe even throw in a banner or nickname for people whose levels make it in game as an incentive to make something good. I know they'd have to look through levels and pick good ones, but there's no way that Mediatonic doesn't have the capacity for that. If you just have a few people working together to pick maps, it can't be a long endeavour at all. useful, and you can even narrow it down by like play and like counts if you need less to look at. Speaking of that though, I'm also looking for Slime Factory maps to play, because if Mediatonic won't give them to us, I want to play yours, so feel free to send me some high quality levels in this theme, either by you or somebody else, and I'll check them out. But yeah, it's just confusing to me. Creative has streamlined map making for Mediatonic so much, they can either fall back on the community when needed, or at least have a way easier time making their own levels, and yet this happens regardless. I'm sorry, but what was the point of Creative if this happens anyway? It wasn't the whole reason we moved to Creative to prevent these kinds of content droughts? Anyway, you get the point about how new levels can continue. Next point, which I say is number 2 priority, is new themes and features, just general new additions to creative mode. I'm sure it's actually a good amount of effort to make these updates. They manage consistently every 8 weeks for a long time, but I digress, maybe they just can't anymore. How about, if you need more time to cook new content, repurpose old content in the meantime? Right now we only have classic and digital themes being fully fleshed out in creative. The game had 8 seasons between those. That's 8 themes worth of obstacles and objects and stuff you can add right there. Even if you added a season's entire contents each update, that's 8 updates you can store while you work on new stuff, and I promise you the players will love it. And there's still plenty of stuff arbitrarily missing. Bert from Legacy Season 3 was in plenty of Creative's original promotional material and hasn't made it in. The stuff like the falling jump showdown tiles, the pinball flippers from Skyline Stumble, the hurdles from Swiveler, SS2's iron thrusters, stuff like that. This isn't an exhaustive list in the slightest. And even for more random things that aren't obstacles but would just be nice to help creators, why is there no invisible finish zone option for racers? Why can't we have a survivor with a finish line like in Hoverboard Heroes? There's a bunch of random decorations missing from early seasons. You get the idea. There's literally so much existing stuff and just general quality of life things that can just be shoved into creative with a lot less effort than making entirely new things if they need to stall while they make said new things. Mediatonic, I promise you, you could probably do 2 updates in a row with just old content added to creative if you needed to, and people would eat it up. They'd be happy. All you'd need to do is communicate why you're doing that, and that new content will be coming soon, which is my 3rd point, communication. I said these were in order of the number 1 and 2 and 3 most important things, but arguably this is actually number 1. Anyone who's been in the community for a good minute knows Mediatonic's communication has always been severely lacking, but obviously when stuff like this happens, it's especially noticeable. It says a lot that the entire community being on fire for over 24 hours and a ton of articles being written about the situation is what it took for Mediatonic to tweet a response that honestly isn't even bare minimum. If you're gonna have these content droughts, if they're necessary for one reason or another, I promise you any reasonable player will be understanding if you explain what's going on. When the update dropped, or preferably before, all you needed to do is be honest that yes, this is a smaller update, but it's because the next update is big or just needed more time, and if it's because of going into Fortnite, which they obviously wouldn't be allowed to talk about yet, they could at least be vague and say this is a long-term content drought, but it's because something huge is in the works that we'll get more details about in 2026 or whenever it might be ready. And if it's just the worst case scenario that the game is going on autopilot indefinitely with nothing on the horizon, not even a Fortnite port, I wish there was a bit more transparency anyway. I get that you can't directly just say it because that obviously discourages players from playing and especially from putting money into the game, but through corporate wording you can still get the message across without it sounding bad. Heck, you can even make it sound good. If there's really no future plans for new content, you can be honest there's no new content, but make it sound good by saying that we're getting these monthly events and stuff instead, which is technically more frequent and consistent than updates used to be. Right now you've given people one of 2 expectations: that the game is going on autopilot forever, or that this is a temporary content drought with new stuff on the horizon. You need to make sure people know which one it is. If it's the former and it's autopilot, then people expecting the latter will continue grilling you every update till they realise what's going on and feel completely betrayed and never trust Epic again. If it's the latter and new stuff is coming, then right now you have people thinking otherwise, thinking the game is an autopilot forever regardless of if new stuff is coming. People are literally actively quitting, thinking it's all over because of your garbage and useless statement you made. Either way, staying silent from here is only hurting your game, so even if you feel like radio silence is the best course of action, you need to sort it out and clarify, I promise you. You just still need to be doing some updates, even if they're small, and you need to be communicating accordingly, and then we'll be good. In summary, is Fall Guys shutting down soon? Probably not. I think it's highly unreasonable to just jump straight to that conclusion, but they need to make changes, be more transparent, because right now people are rightfully concerned about the current direction. This game's future really is uncertain if something doesn't change. I urge you to support this video in any way you can, whether it's just a like or you go beyond with comments and shares, because I tried my absolute best, especially in that last section, to get the best message I can across to Mediatonic. I just need your help in making sure they actually see and hear it. And also make sure they hear your message too on socials and stuff like that. Spread the message of how much you care about this game and how you hate seeing it like this and how you might be worried. It does seem like the hashtag #SaveFallGuys are getting a lot of use recently, so feel free to join in with that. Once again, I truly hope you'll stick with me. I'm cooking up a ton of content for you, and we can only hope Mediatonic will be doing the same soon, but in the meantime, these videos on screen should help keep you busy and entertained.